On a quiet street, a part-time postal worker rushed to a job interview, his only hope to earn enough for his sick mother's care. But when he saw an elderly man struggling with a flat tire, he stopped to help without hesitation. The delay cost him the interview. What he didn't know was the man he helped was the CEO's father. Moved by his quiet integrity, the company gave him a second chance, one that changed his life forever. Before we jump into this powerful story, tell us, have you ever helped someone without expecting anything in return? We'd love to hear your story. The morning air in Richmond, Virginia, carried that quiet chill unique to early autumn, cool enough to make you breathe deeper, but not yet biting. The leaves had begun their slow descent onto the sidewalks, their golden hues catching the sunlight just enough to make the whole neighborhood seem like it was glowing. On Maplewood Avenue, tucked between rows of weathered row houses and old red brick storefronts, Terence Ward, 31, zipped up his second-hand windbreaker and locked the front door behind him. He glanced once through the window at the living room where his mother, Ruby Ward, was still asleep under a patchwork quilt, her breathing shallow but steady. A small oxygen machine clicked gently at her bedside, a reminder of time ticking down, of why this morning mattered. Terence walked toward the battered electric bike he'd been patching up for weeks. It used to be a city rental, now salvaged, reassembled, and given a second life with wires repurposed from old radios and parts scavenged from garage sales. He checked the brakes again just in case, not because he was a perfectionist, but because that's how his mind worked. Every detail mattered, every bolt, every click, especially today. Today was the interview. Interstate Logistics, the biggest shipping company in the tri-state area, was opening new roles on its vehicle maintenance support team, a full-time position with benefits. Benefits, that was the word that kept echoing through Terence's mind like a quiet prayer. Insurance. Chemo coverage, medications his mother couldn't afford. He'd printed 3 copies of his resume the night before, on borrowed printer paper from the corner store where the clerk let him use the machine after hours. He'd pressed his shirt with a kitchen iron, cleaned his work boots with a toothbrush, and rehearsed how to describe his freelance repair work as self-directed technical experience. It was a gamble, sure. No degree, no formal certifications. Just a man with 10 years of real-world grit under his nails and a toolbox full of stories. But Interstate's flyer said they were looking for driven, hands-on problem solvers. That was him. He started pedaling, the motor humming gently beneath him. Richmond's streets stretched out ahead, some smooth, others pocked with cracks and potholes that told stories of hard winters and budget cuts. His route would take him past the East End Cemetery, over the pedestrian bridge, through the edge of the industrial district, and finally to the interstate headquarters off Commerce Road. If traffic stayed light and the battery held, he'd make it in 40 minutes, 45 tops. He allowed himself one glance at his watch and exhaled. Right on schedule. The city hadn't woken up fully yet. Coffee shops were just unlocking doors. Dogs tugged their sleepy owners down sidewalks. Terence rode with focus, hands steady on the handlebars, mind locked onto the address in his head. He passed the high school where he once fixed a janitor's old truck for $10 and a meatloaf sandwich. He passed the alley where he'd once helped a stranded nurse restart her engine during a January freeze. These little flashes of memory kept him steady, reminders that even if nobody kept score, he remembered. He remembered who he was, even when the world tried to forget. The wind picked up slightly as he turned onto a wider road, leaves skittering across the pavement in tight spirals. He didn't know it yet, but in less than 20 minutes something, or someone would force him to choose between making that interview or being the man he'd always been. But right now, all he had was the road, the hum of his bike, and a single thought spinning through his chest like a wheel in motion. Don't be late. Don't mess this up. This is for her. And somewhere back in that small house on Maplewood Avenue, Ruby stirred, unaware that today, quietly, almost invisibly, her son was about to change everything. Just as Terence rounded the bend onto Jefferson Parkway, where the suburban sprawl gave way to open patches of roadside and the trees leaned low like old sentries, he noticed something ahead that didn't belong. A gray utility van was pulled off to the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking against the morning light like a distress signal. The back end was slightly tilted, slumped awkwardly to one side. As he drew closer, he saw an older white man crouched near the rear tire, wrestling with a rusted jack and a lug wrench that clearly wasn't doing the job. The man's camping gear, folded chairs, plastic bins, and a rolled-up tent had been hastily yanked out to reach the spare tire, now lying on the asphalt like a wounded limb. His movements were stiff, not panicked, but frustrated, in that particular way older folks get when things don't go as planned. Terence slowed down, not out of curiosity, but out of instinct. His eyes scanned the scene like a mechanic reading a blueprint. One tire completely blown, jack misaligned. The man's knee braced awkwardly against the bumper. Sweat clung to his brow even in the cool air. Then, just for a moment, Terence froze. The way the old man leaned over, left leg stiff, right hand gripping the jack with a tremor he couldn't hide, it pulled something from memory. A snapshot, worn and soft around the edges. His father, Alton Ward, kneeling beside their old Chevy in the church parking lot, hands blackened with grease, too stubborn to ask for help, too proud to let his son carry the heavier tools. His father had been strong, meticulous, quiet, until that one night when the brakes failed on a rainy stretch of I-64 and nothing Terence or anyone else did could bring him back. Terence's grip on the handlebars tightened. He could just keep riding. He should keep riding. But that image, his father's faded windbreaker, the slope of his shoulders, the smell of old oil and wood smoke, washed over him like a tide he couldn't resist. This man might be a stranger, but the way he hunched, the stubborn set of his jaw, it mirrored his dad so clearly it felt like time folding in on itself. He pulled over. "You all right there, sir?" he called, stepping off his bike and lowering his backpack gently to the curb. The man looked up, blinking beneath a worn knit cap. "Damn thing blew out a mile back. I thought I'd make it here and swap it out. Jack's bent, won't hold the weight." Terence knelt beside him without hesitation, eyes narrowing on the problem. "You've got a Harbor Freight jack and a Steel Fame van. That's not a good match." His hands were already moving, unzipping a side pocket from his backpack, where he kept a compact jack he'd reinforced himself. "Mind if I give it a shot?" The man hesitated, then nodded. "You know your way around this stuff?" Terence allowed himself a small grin. Within minutes the van was lifted steadily, the old tire pulled free and the spare aligned. But Terence didn't stop there. His fingers traced along the brake lines out of habit. He noticed a small leak near the left rear caliper and a frayed wire at the taillight harness. Most folks wouldn't have noticed. Most folks wouldn't have cared. But Terence had always believed that half-fixing a problem was the same as ignoring it. He stood and turned to the man. "I don't mean to overstep, but your rear brake's got a minor leak. It's slow now, but if you're heading anywhere with hills—" He trailed off, letting the warning land. "I'd take it real easy. And your tail light's half dead. Wire's loose." The man rubbed his forehead. "Damn. Didn't even notice. I just packed the thing for a few days out by the mountains. Figured it'd hold." Terence nodded, pulling a small roll of electric tape from his bag and crouching again. "Give me 3 more minutes. I'll at least stop the leak for now and patch the light. Won't be pretty, but it'll get you to the next town safe." The older man watched him work, silence falling between them except for the soft rip of tape and the metallic clink of tools. There was no small talk, no exchange of names, just quiet focus. That was how Terence liked it. Do the job right. Let the work speak. When he finally stepped back and wiped his hands, the van looked road-ready again. Still dusty, still old, but steady. "You didn't have to stop," the man finally said, his voice lower now. "Most folks wouldn't have. You on your way somewhere?" Terence checked his watch. He was late. No longer borderline, no longer on the edge. He was solidly, undeniably late. But he just shrugged and said, "Yeah, but you looked like you needed help more than I needed to be early." The man squinted at him, studying the curve of his shoulders, the way his hands still hovered near the tools as if reluctant to let them rest. "You always this decent to strangers?" Terence laughed softly. "Let's just say I've been on the side of the road before, watching cars fly by with my hood up and my pride in my throat." But what he didn't say, what he didn't need to, was that this wasn't just about helping a stranger. It was about a promise he'd made to himself after his father died. A quiet vow that no one would feel as alone as Alton Ward did on that dark highway, waiting for help that never came. He packed his things, gave the tire one last kick to test the tension, and climbed back onto his bike. The older man opened his mouth to speak, maybe to ask for a name, maybe to offer something, but Terence was already easing the pedals forward. "Safe travels," he called over his shoulder, and meant it. The man raised a hand in reply. "You too, son, wherever you're headed." But Terence didn't look back. His chest was tight, his mind already racing ahead to the office lobby he might not be allowed into. The HR rep who would glance at the clock and shake her head. Still, he couldn't bring himself to regret stopping, not even for a second. Because something deep inside him whispered, "Do the right thing, even when no one sees, especially then." By the time Terence reached the Interstate Logistics headquarters, the morning had shifted from soft gold to full glare. The building was tall but unassuming, wrapped in brushed steel and wide windows, sitting just off Commerce Road like a quiet giant watching the flow of trucks below. The parking lot was already packed, a sea of delivery vans and maintenance rigs lined up with military precision. Terence coasted to the bike rack near the employee entrance, his heart pounding harder than it had during the ride. He chained up his bike, smoothed the front of his shirt, and checked his watch. 9:43. The interview block had started at 9:30 sharp. He was 13 minutes late, and there was no hiding it. Inside, the lobby was clean and humming with that kind of corporate calm, muted voices, coffee brewing somewhere in the back, the click of heels on polished concrete. A young woman sat behind the reception desk, her hair pulled into a tight bun, her badge clipped neatly to her collar. She looked up as Terence approached, her expression shifting slightly when she noticed the sweat clinging to his temple, the backpack slung over one shoulder. "Hi," he began, trying to keep his voice even, professional. "I had an interview scheduled this morning for the field technician role. He paused, choosing honesty over spin. "I stopped to help someone with a flat tire. I know I'm late. I understand if I missed the slot, but I wanted to drop off my resume anyway." The receptionist blinked once, then offered a polite but practiced smile. "Let me check the list." She tapped a few keys, squinted at the screen. "Looks like the last candidate just went in. I'm sorry, Mr. Ward, but the hiring team is only doing interviews this morning." Terence nodded slowly, the disappointment settling in like a weight at the base of his spine. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just reached into his bag, handed over his neatly folded resume, and said, "If there's any other opening in the future, I'd be grateful to be considered." His voice didn't crack, but it was close. He turned to leave, each step a little heavier than the one before. What he didn't see, what he couldn't have seen, was the man in the gray blazer standing just inside the hallway past the glass partition. He'd come down for a cup of coffee, or maybe just a break from the fourth interview of the morning. He was tall, mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and a quiet presence that made people straighten up when he entered a room. He wasn't flashy. He didn't speak unless he had something to say. His name was Gregory Beck, and he was the regional operations manager for Interstate's Eastern Corridor. Gregory hadn't planned on coming to the front desk, but something about the voice he'd just overheard, the humility in it, the steadiness even in disappointment, had pulled him forward. Through the glass he watched as Terence handed off his resume, nodded, and turned without protest. That alone marked him different from the dozen applicants who had strutted through the door earlier that morning. "Did he miss his slot?" Gregory asked the receptionist softly. She nodded. "He said he stopped to help someone on the road, came in late, unfortunately." Gregory glanced down at the resume now resting beside the keyboard. He didn't pick it up, not yet. He simply asked, "Did he say who he helped?" "No," she said, a little puzzled. "Just said it was a driver with a flat." Gregory stood there for a long second. Then he turned and walked back down the hall. Outside, Terence mounted his bike in silence. His legs were heavier now, and the battery had dipped into the red. As he started the ride back home, his thoughts churned, not with regret, but with a quiet kind of ache. He didn't regret stopping. That much he knew. His father would have done the same. But it still stung, the finality of it. That closed door. That lost chance. When he got home, Ruby was up, wrapped in her robe, moving slowly through the kitchen with her usual grace and stubbornness. "How'd it go?" she asked, stirring tea, the smell of lemon and ginger filling the air. Terence hesitated. "They were already full up when I got there," he said carefully. "Didn't get the interview. But I left my papers." Ruby didn't press. She just nodded and handed him a cup. "Well, maybe they'll see what matters." He smiled faintly. She always had that way of saying simple things like they were scripture. That afternoon he cleaned the carburetor on Mrs. Lacey's lawnmower. That evening he adjusted the gears on a neighbor's old mountain bike. Life, as always, moved forward, and Terence moved with it. But somewhere, in an office 2 floors above the lobby where he'd stood just hours before, Gregory Beck was dialing a number. And across town, a man with a gray van and a patched-up brake line was pulling into his driveway, still thinking about the quiet young man who'd knelt beside his broken tire and asked nothing in return. The next morning, Terence was wiping down the handlebars of his bike, preparing for another long day of odd jobs and errands, when his phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number flashing across the cracked screen. He stared at it for a moment, debating whether to answer. Most of the time, unknown numbers meant missed payments or recycled scams, but something nudged him. A whisper of hope, maybe. He pressed accept. "Mr. Ward," a calm, professional voice said on the other end. "This is Amelia Green. I'm the Director of Field Operations at Interstate Logistics. Do you have a moment to talk?" Terence straightened instinctively. "Yes, ma'am, of course." "I understand you came to our headquarters yesterday for an interview," she continued, her tone polite but not rehearsed, "and that you arrived late because of a road." Terence took a breath, steadying himself. "Yes, ma'am. I stopped to help a man with a blown tire. I didn't want to be late, but I didn't feel right riding past." There was a pause on the line, not uncomfortable, just considered. Then Amelia said, "I believe the man you helped was my father." The words landed with a kind of soft thunder. Terence froze, his hand gripping the handlebar as his mind reeled. The van, the gear, the older man's voice. Green. "I didn't know," he said finally, genuinely caught off guard. He didn't say who he was. "I didn't stop for any reason except he needed help." "And you gave it," Amelia said, her voice carrying something warmer now, not just professionalism but appreciation. "He told me everything, about how you didn't just change the tire, you checked his brakes, patched his wiring, made sure he could get home safe. He said you reminded him of someone." Terence blinked, throat tightening. "That's kind of him. My father doesn't hand out compliments lightly," she added, "and neither do I. Mr. Ward, I'd like you to come back in, not for an interview, just to talk. Are you free this afternoon?" He didn't even have to check his schedule. "Yes, ma'am, I can be there." "Good. 1 o'clock. Ask for me at the front." When the call ended, Terence stood there for a moment, phone still in his hand, heart thudding. The wind picked up just enough to rattle the wind chimes Ruby had hung outside the kitchen window, soft, uncertain music floating through the air. He turned toward the house, then back to the bike. This time the ride wouldn't be a gamble. It would be something else entirely. At 1 o'clock sharp, he stepped through the same glass doors he'd walked out of the day before, except now the receptionist stood and greeted him with a quiet nod. "Ms. Green is expecting you," she said, leading him down a hallway lined with framed photos of delivery routes, community events, and employee spotlights. Terence kept his eyes forward, shoulders back. He wasn't nervous, not exactly, more like alert, ready. Amelia Green was younger than he expected. Late 30s, poised, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a directness that didn't feel cold, just efficient. She rose from her desk when he entered and offered a handshake that was firm without being performative. "Thanks for coming in," she said. "Have a seat." He did. I've reviewed your resume, and more importantly, I've reviewed the dashboard camera footage from my father's van, she said. We install them in every field vehicle, mostly for liability, but in this case it was something else entirely. Terence felt his stomach tighten. I didn't know he had a camera running. That's why it matters, she said, leaning forward. You weren't performing, you weren't posturing, you were just being who you are. She paused. Let that sit. We've got a position open on our mobile technical support team, the folks who go out when a delivery truck breaks down mid-route. It's a tough job, demanding, unpredictable, but it's also essential, and it needs people with quick thinking, a steady hand, and, frankly, integrity. Terence looked up. She was watching him with interest now, but also with a kind of quiet confidence, like she already knew what he'd say. I know you didn't get your interview, but you showed us who you are, and that counts more than any answer to a canned question. He didn't speak right away. His throat felt thick, but not from nerves, from something else, a feeling he hadn't tasted in a long time. Recognition. I'd be honored, he said quietly. Good, she replied, standing and extending her hand again. Welcome to the team, Mr. Ward. As they walked back through the lobby together, Terence caught a glimpse of a familiar figure through the glass near the exit. Mr. Walter Green, leaning slightly on a cane, stood near a vending machine, sipping from a paper cup of coffee. He looked up and gave Terence a small nod, not overly grand, not sentimental, just steady, just real. And in that nod, Terence felt something settle inside him, something like peace. Outside, the wind had picked up again, but this time it felt different, not cold, not distant, just alive. He stepped into the breeze, his new employee badge tucked into his coat pocket, and smiled, not because everything was easy now, but because, for the first time in a long time, something had shifted, not by chance, by choice. 3 months later, the mornings still came early, but they felt different now. Terence stood beside Interstate's gleaming white mobile service van, the company logo sharp and clean on the side, his name embroidered above the left breast pocket of his uniform. T. Ward, Field Tech Supervisor. He still woke before sunrise, still brewed his coffee in the same dented metal pot on Ruby's stovetop, still took the time to grease the bike chain that got him to the depot. But now, instead of wondering if the world would notice the kind of man he was, he moved with the quiet assurance that it already had. The work was hard, no one pretended otherwise. The calls came at all hours, trucks overheating on back roads, blown tires during snow flurries, locked ignitions in alleyways behind restaurants at midnight. But Terence never flinched. He logged more hours than anyone in the department, and not because he was trying to prove something. It was just who he was. When something broke, he fixed it. When someone was stranded, he showed up. But it wasn't just the work that had changed. It was the way people looked at him now. Technicians who once walked past him without a word now stopped to ask advice on engine sensors. Drivers shook his hand after a roadside rescue and remembered his name. Even Amelia, who ran operations with a surgeon's precision, had started inviting him into morning meetings, asking what he thought about optimizing response routes or minimizing time lost during call-ins. He didn't speak much at first, just short answers, direct and clear, but over time people began to listen when he did, because he didn't waste words, and because every suggestion he made worked. One cold morning in January, Terence returned from a service run on I-95 where he'd crawled under a refrigerated truck in 22-degree weather to replace a busted axle mount. He was soaked, freezing, and grinning like he'd just won the lottery. That truck's hauling a food delivery for the hospital, he explained, stripping off his gloves. I wasn't about to let someone's chemo meds go bad over a broken bracket. Later that week, Amelia called him into her office again. Not for a reprimand, not for a formality, but to offer him the role of technical support lead for the entire Richmond fleet. It's not a desk job, she said, knowing what mattered to him. You'll still be in the field, but you'll oversee 3 crews, run diagnostics strategy, and mentor the new hires. You've built trust out there, and I want others learning from you. Terence didn't answer right away. He looked at the framed photo on her shelf. Amelia with her father, smiling beside a campfire in that same stubborn gray van. He thought of the road, of the choices he'd made, of the day he rode away from that busted tire thinking the opportunity was lost. Then he met her eyes, and nodded once. Yeah, I'll take it. At home, Ruby had more color in her face these days. The treatments were grueling, but she was holding on. Stronger than she'd looked in months, Interstate's health plan covered more than they expected, and for the first time in a long time they weren't rationing medications or skipping checkups. One evening, as Terence prepared her tea, she asked softly, "You ever think about how different things might have gone if you hadn't stopped that day?" Terence smiled, stirring honey into the mug. "All the time, but I also know, if I'd ridden past, I wouldn't have liked the man I saw in the mirror the next morning." She nodded, sipping slowly, her eyes shining. "Your father would have been proud." Sometimes, when the depot was quiet and the sun just rising, Terence would stand by the service van and look out at the lot. The trucks lined up, the city stretching out beyond them, a life rebuilt one small act at a time. He didn't wear his new title like a crown, he wore it like a tool belt, something earned, something useful, something that reminded him why he showed up. Because in the end, it had never been about the badge or the paycheck or the name on the uniform. It was about that moment on Jefferson Parkway, when he chose to stop not for recognition, not for reward, but because someone needed help, and he knew how to give it. And that single choice, the kind no one else might have noticed, turned out to be the one that changed everything. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.